To update the database using code, there are two possibilities: using the business component of the transaction through its methods, or exclusively within a procedure through the new for each commands with direct assignment of the attributes to be modified and the delete command. As we saw, both options control the uniqueness of records. That is, no records with a repeated primary or candidate key are ever allowed in the database. In the example, it will never be possible to have two attractions with the same identifier. And if, for example, attraction name were a candidate key, no two attractions with the same name would be allowed either. This is automatically checked by the business component, or by the command in the procedure before making the operation on the database. So far, it's the same. Now let's look at the differences. Regarding the referential integrity check, the insertion, update, or deletion through a business component will check, before making the operation, that the referential integrity is not broken, just as the transaction does. For example, if we want to change the category of attraction 3 to a non-existent one, the business component will first check that the category 100 exists in the category table. And if it doesn't exist, it will not try to update it. It will also load an error message indicating it in the collection of messages returned if we ask it to do so. On the other hand, the operations performed by procedure-specific commands will not perform any referential integrity check whatsoever. This means that if, for example, we want to update the category of attraction 3 now by assignment within a for each, the category table will not be queried to find out if a category 100 exists before the order is sent to the database to update that record. Therefore, if the database doesn't check the referential integrity either, we'll be left with inconsistent data. And if it does check it, as is the default behavior, it'll throw an exception and the program being executed will cancel. So for the time being, the scale seems to be tipping towards the use of business components. However, if the records to be updated are in the millions or billions, things change a bit. Checking the referential integrity of each record before performing the operation is a time-consuming task. It's negligible in the case of a few records, but very important in the case of millions. So in that case, the update with procedural commands is the solution if performance becomes critical. In the example, we could run the for each only if we're sure that category 100 exists. And we could even improve performance further by using the blocking clause of the for each. And finally, what about rules and events defined in the transaction? We know that the update through business components will execute them, the corresponding ones, of course, that do not have to do with the transaction interface. So, if we have an error rule that doesn't allow us to enter an attraction without our name, and we try, for example, to insert a new auto-numbered attraction through the business component, will it be allowed? No, it won't be allowed, and the error will be captured in the message collection. On the other hand, when it comes to database update commands in procedures, the transaction is not involved at all. Or, it's only involved to the extent that it defines the database table, but only for that. So rules or events are not considered at all. Therefore, in the example, even if there is an error rule, the insertion through the new command in a procedure will not even be aware of it, and will insert the record with an empty name without any problem. Again, here the scale clearly tips toward using business components rather than update commands in procedures, since we ensure that all the data logic is executed. We could repeat it in the procedure, but we know the problems of duplication. In addition, executing rules and events obviously takes time. If performance is a problem, then we probably need to update the database with procedure-specific commands. One last advantage of using business components over specific update commands is that, while the former can be used in virtually any object that supports code, for example, in web panel or panel events, the latter can only be programmed in procedures. The same applies to commit and rollback for both ways. That is to say, the developer must decide to use them where it's most convenient, regardless of whether procedures have the commit on exit property set to yes by default. Let's look at a special case that may cause confusion. Suppose that from this web panel, we want to call this procedure that will try to insert an attraction in the database and will return its ID, since it's auto-numbered. We have to decide whether to insert the record with the new command or with the business component. First, let's do it with the command. Since the commit on exit property is set to its default value, yes, and clearly an operation is being performed on the database, then Genexus places an implicit commit at the end of the procedure source code. For this reason, we know that when returning from procedure execution, if it was possible to insert the record in this statement, then it will have already been committed. And that's why the navigation list gives us this warning. Let's take a look at the attractions in the database. Now we run it. Let's look at the attractions again. As we expected, here we found the new tourist attraction. But now let's see what could have happened if instead of inserting with the new command, we had done it with the business component. Let's put a 2 to the name Eiffel Tower. And not explicitly commit, since we have the commit on exit property enabled. If we look at the navigation list, we can already see something odd. It's not giving us the same warning as in the other case regarding the commit on exit property. And then, if we run it, we can see that it informs us of the next attraction number, which makes us think that it was correctly inserted and committed. But if we look for it in the transaction, it's not there. What happened? In previous videos, we've repeatedly said that having the commit on exit property of a procedure set to yes does not mean that Genexus will always place a commit at the end of the source code. We said that it will only do so if it finds that in the procedure source, somewhere, the database is being accessed to do some CRUD operation, create, update, or delete. Thus, in the first case, it will clearly place a commit because the new command unequivocally represents a CRUD operation. However, it doesn't recognize an operation of this type for the second case. It takes the business component by its structure as an SDT and fails to interpret the insert method accordingly. So it doesn't understand that in the source of this procedure, you want to do any CRUD operation. And that's why it doesn't add the commit at the end of the source code. So in this case, for the time being, we'll have no choice but to make it explicit. If we try it now, it behaves as expected. We've seen the main differences between performing CRUD operations with business components and doing it directly in procedures through specific commands.